Hello and welcome to TRP News, your weekly progressive news digest. I'm your host, James Andre, and here's what we have coming up this week. Update on the Iran nuclear negotiations, the Indiana religious freedom law, Hillary Clinton, and municipal broadband. What's going on with the FCC and these states legalizing or allowing municipal broadband. First up is the Iran negotiations. You may have heard now in the past week there has been a framework agreement reached with the P5+1 and Iran. The P5+1 being the UN Security Council plus Germany and Iran. They have agreed to, in general principle, to certain ideas of what's going to be in the final agreement, which is supposed to be complete by this June 30th, the end of June. Among the issues at contention are the amount of enriched uranium that Iran is allowed to have on hand, the production, uranium or plutonium production capability, and sanctions relief, of course. So the framework agreement in principle is that, number one, that they will cut centrifuges, which are used to enrich uranium, which you need to do before you can use it in a nuclear device, from 19,000 down to 6,000, and they're only allowed to keep so-called first-generation centrifuges, which are the sort of older technology and only used for research purposes. It also cuts the enriched uranium stockpile for Iran by 97%. So most of their stockpile they'll have to get rid of, and most of their centrifuges they'll have to get rid of. The U.S. and the United Nations and the European Union all have sanctions on Iran, and those sanctions will be lifted once Iran is deemed to have complied with the agreement. American sanctions related to terrorism, human rights abuses, and non-nuclear weapons will remain. And the IAEA, with the International Atomic Energy Agency, will have access to all of Iran's nuclear facilities and to its nuclear supply chain. So there will be inspections ongoing, and the IAEA, which is the international body that does this sort of thing, will be allowed to check up and see whether Iran is in compliance or not. Secretary of State Kerry has said that there is no sunset to this agreement. That, in other words, there's no expiration date. Iran is expected to comply and continue to comply. The idea, as I've said before, is that there is no nuclear weapon, no proliferation of nuclear weapons. So no one wants that to happen, doesn't matter who it is. So the idea is that we do not add to the world's nuclear stockpile, nuclear weapons stockpile. Of course, there are critics to the agreement already, even though a lot of people are saying this is more than anyone expected. They say it does not go far enough, but as yet there's very little being said in terms of alternatives. So the Israel and Bibi Netanyahu have said that they don't want any nuclear capability whatsoever. Well, they also say that Iran can't be trusted to live up to the agreement, so I don't see how it makes much difference. Either they're not going to produce a bomb or they are going to produce a bomb. So if they're going to lie about it and do it behind our backs while we're inspecting their programs, then even if we say get rid of all your nuclear capability, there's no guarantee that that's going to be successful either. So it seems to me it's better to be engaged and participating with them as a partner, and that way we just have a little bit more leverage, a little bit more information as to what's happening, rather than saying, oh, that you're not allowed anything, and then what? We just get to inspect their entire country on a regular basis? How does that work? We just, spy on them, which, I guess Israel wouldn't mind doing that, but then we have no leverage, no program in place to make sure that nothing's going on. Right now we know where the facilities are, and we are, under this framework, going to be allowed to monitor them and investigate what's happening. And I've said this before in terms of, the war on terror. Sometimes it's better to have the devil you know, and that way you can monitor and you can keep track of what things are happening. But when you kill like the head of the snake, like an Osama bin Laden, then suddenly you have terror cells proliferating around the world, all over Africa, all over the Middle East. Now you have ISIS. So, we have to be careful about this all or nothing approach, because sometimes there are unintended consequences. Bibi has said, the Prime Minister of Israel has said that this is a very bad deal, and he's going to be lobbying for a better deal, which, as I just said, we don't really know what a better deal looks like. At a certain point, we have to be in a partnership with them on some level. Even if you say there's no nuclear capability whatsoever, there has to be some sort of partnership in order to establish that that's even the case. So, if you can say no nuclear capability, why not say no weapons capability whatsoever, no missile capability at all? No tanks, no military aircraft. I mean, at what point do you draw the line? So, of course, Israel views Iran as an enemy, and I suppose Iran views Israel as an enemy, but we can't fully dictate the entire existence and operation of any one country, whether we think they are good or bad. North Korea, case in point. So, what one of the things they're saying is that the so-called breakout time, which is the amount of time that will be required to go from where you are to able to deploy a nuclear weapon, is under this framework going to be 1 year, which people are saying is insufficient. 1 year is a long time in nuclear weapon terms. So 1 year or 10 years, and the thing is that they've been saying this, I think, since 1992. People have been saying Iran is within months of having a nuclear weapon. So it's not that easy. North Korea has been trying to develop it and still hasn't got it right, and no one's even getting in their way at all, except of course, there are sanctions against North Korea currently. But, it's not that easy. It's not that easy to do. It takes advanced technology, and, there's a lot of restrictions on the sale and use of that technology to begin with. So a year breakout time, I think, is just splitting hairs. It's long enough, especially if there's an inspection regime in place. And so, it doesn't seem like there's a lot to worry about there. And as I said, they're complaining that they could still build a weapon with a year breakout time, even if there are inspections. But as I said, if you're worried about them doing it with inspections, then they can just as easily do it without inspections. If there's no agreement, then they can just continue on their merry way like they were doing before and build a weapon in their own good time. So, worrying about whether or not they're going to comply is just something that's let's cross that bridge when we come to it. So Bibi's complaining, and Senator Feinstein has even said that I wish that he would contain himself. So a lot of people on one side are saying, hey, let's see what this is about. Let's take this to its culmination. And as Obama said, we are powerful enough to be able to test these propositions without putting ourselves at risk. The doctrine is, the Obama doctrine is, we will engage, but we preserve all our capabilities. So that's another thing. Sanctions aren't off the table. Military action is not off the table. This is one step, one part of the process, and it's not an all or nothing process. So, to talk about let's not have an agreement, well, if that agreement needs to be tightened up or needs to be improved, then we'll know it. And otherwise, what is the alternative? As I said, they don't want to admit it, and even President Obama said, well, it's not the only alternative. But really, if you don't have an understanding, the only alternative is to fight, to go to war, to military action. And actually, a lot of these Republicans now are even openly calling for bombing. People have actually said, elected officials have actually said it's time to bomb them. So that's what we're looking at. And what do you think is going to happen to the Middle East if we start bombing Iran? Now, they are actors against us in some areas, and they're actors in partnership with us in other areas. But one thing is, we know what happened to Iraq when we got rid of their leader, their head of state. And if you get rid of Iran, we're looking at, talk about what's bad for Israel. That can only make things worse, destabilize the region, and we've already gone there once, and it's cost us this relationship for decades now in terms of interfering with Iran. And it's just not a good idea. We have to pull back a little bit so we can understand the consequences of our actions, and we can't always be the bull in the china shop and just try to go in and destroy everything, because, as I said, you never know. There's unintended consequences. You cut off the head, you go in and do something you think is going to be effective, and trust me, we saw this before on with the presidential election and the GOP. Everything they tried to do to cut off the head and eliminate Obama as a viable candidate backfired. From praying for a storm for the Democratic National Convention and actually getting a hurricane in their own convention. So they are not the ones we want to listen to when it comes to saying this is absolutely what we need to do. As far as the recent poll that came out, by nearly 2-to-1 a margin, Americans support the notion of striking a deal with Iran that restricts the nation's nuclear program in exchange for loosening sanctions. So despite that, as I said, military calls for military action are increasing and actually they're getting bolder with their calls for bombing and other military intervention. But right now, as it stands, we have a framework that was just announced this past week, and June 30th is the supposed deadline. Keep in mind that this is all arbitrary, this June 30th deadline. This is just a sort of diplomatic method of keeping pressure on and keeping people at the table in order to get something accomplished. But there's no sort of law or real consequences to exceeding that deadline. In fact, it probably will be exceeded. I would guess, I'm guessing 1 to 2 weeks will go past. We'll go into July. So, if it exceeds June 30th, we'll go into July. The Iranians won't want to have a deal, say, the Independence 4th of July week, so it's going to be the week after that. So that's what's going on right now with the Iran negotiations. Okay, also this week, there's been some developments in the Indiana Religious Freedom Law, signed into law by Governor Mike Pence. You probably have heard about this. The law was purported to protect religious decisions of conscience, in other words, to prevent people from being forced to do things that went against their religious beliefs. But really it was intended to shield businesses from having to accommodate same-sex couples. How do we know this? We know this because it was the express intent of supporters and those who were at the signing, the private signing of the bill, and it comes in the wake of legislation around the country legalizing same-sex marriage. So some people are feeling that their religious beliefs are threatened by this wave of acceptance, and they want some sort of legal protection that will allow them basically to discriminate against LGBTs so that they don't have to basically provide services or allow people or to serve people or participate in a commercial transaction with people who they don't agree with because they say that, for example, same-sex marriage goes against their religious beliefs. Well, after a huge outcry and several missteps in the media and a bunch of backpedaling and forward-pedaling, Governor Pence finally signed a fix this past week, into law a so-called fix, altering the legislation and adding some changes in order to protect gays from discrimination and make it clear that the law cannot be used as a basis to discriminate or fail to provide service or fail to treat gays as equal or as any other citizen. The Indiana Senate voted 34-16 to okay changes, and the Indiana House voted 66-30. The interesting side note, the Republicans in the committee that was responsible for drafting the fix to the legislation kicked out the Democrats before they came up with the fix and before they sent it to the full House for a vote. So I guess they didn't want them participating, or maybe there was too much animosity or contention going on. One reason that could be is because there is a fix to the language, non-discrimination language. However, there's no fix in the law to the person, businesses being classified as a person, and there is no fix in the law to the aspect that says that people can use the law as a defense even when the government is not party to any legal action. So in other words, even between private citizens can invoke this law if there is a suit between private citizens, which is another difference, as I said last week, from this law in Indiana to the federal law and other laws around the country. So the Democrats were saying it didn't go far enough. They were kicked out of committee. The person language is unchanged, and the good thing about this is it is a good step forward, not to take away from that, because this is the first time in Indiana that LGBTs are actually a part of non-discrimination, legal non-discrimination language. This is the first time that it has been included in law, written into law in a state law. So that's a pretty good step forward. It's a pretty good legal precedent to have, and so regardless of the other shortcomings of the bill and the fact that the bill's not needed in the first place, your freedoms are protected. That's the whole principle of the United States of America. You are free, and you are free from persecution. You are free to practice what you believe and act as you believe, as long as you aren't harming anyone else. So, the law is unnecessary on that front, and which is another reason we know that it was intended to allow for discrimination. But now we have that big step forward that sexual orientation and gender orientation are not allowed to be discriminated against under this law. So, similar legislation in Arkansas, you probably heard about that. Initially, the governor there was going to sign it, then he wasn't going to sign it, then he will sign it, but it had to go back and be changed, so that's what happened there. The legislation was ultimately modified there to make similar changes. I haven't looked into that fully yet, but suffice to say, it still have the same perspective. It's an unnecessary law. It's basically a law that's intended to separate people. It's intended to provide a basis for people to say, I don't want to have to associate or do business with you. And, the supporters will cite, Native Americans in eagle feathers and grandmothers who have a bakery, but it's just a lot of nonsense that really doesn't apply, for number one, because they are creating an opportunity for a lawsuit, and they will say, well, it doesn't guarantee that you will succeed. Well, these laws don't guarantee that the opposite side will succeed either, the current laws. But what we do have is an ideal in this country that you will be treated the same. Equal protection under the laws, equal protection in the public, in the public. You will not be treated any differently for who you are. So, again, that just really goes back to whatever your religious belief is, you should not be treated differently. You should not be treated differently for having a religious belief. You should not be treated differently for not having that religious belief. So the Supreme Court's going to hear arguments in 4 cases concerning the constitutionality of same-sex marriage. So this law is actually still, even though it's legalized in several states, many states, it's still actually not the law of the land yet. I'm going about 85% on this one that they're going to uphold the same-sex marriage. Two of these cases are about state recognition of same-sex marriages in other states. So that one's a little iffy. This is a conservative court. I'm going to say that they are not, it depends on how the other cases go. So I'm going to say that they are not going to force other states to recognize same-sex marriage, but they are going to uphold the legality of same-sex marriage, of states recognizing it. So states will be able to recognize it, but they won't be forced to recognize other states' legalization of it. That's my call on what the Supreme Court's going to do. We'll see if I turn out to be right. So the cases concern prohibitions of same-sex marriage in Kentucky, Michigan, Tennessee, and Ohio. So that's in the current court docket, and I'll keep you updated as to what's going to be happening with that. And meanwhile, we have the new, the so-called fix in Indiana has been signed into law. The Arkansas legislation has been modified, so people are kind of standing down, although several businesses in Indiana say, major companies are saying it's still not enough. It doesn't go far enough. So, don't get me started about the Republicans and especially Mike Pence's performance over the past couple of weeks. This guy is basically saying whatever he can say. They do the littlest bit possible. They think, oh, well, we appease the gays, so that's enough. No, this legislation is wacky to begin with. As Michael Steele, the former chairman of the Republican Party, put it, it's just another case of why. Why did you come up with this legislation? You're basically just trying to anger people. You're trying to divide people. You're trying to, it's sort of this primal fear that's coming out of their amygdala, and it just is another example of Republicans acting on that fear and acting on their disdain for anyone that's different from what they believe, and acting on their narrow-mindedness. So this law is unnecessary. This fix is a good step because of the codification of non-discrimination language, but at the same time, it's still a step in the wrong direction. So we'll keep you updated as things unfold, but right now some people are standing down, and a lot of people are still saying it's not enough. Now, that's the current state of that in Indiana, the religious freedom law. All right, next I wanted to talk a little bit about Hillary Clinton. She is the presumptive nominee and presumptive candidate for the presidency in the 2016 presidential election. I just want to talk a little bit about this. I'm probably going to keep talking a little bit about it because the amount of divisiveness I'm hearing. I'm seeing online a lot of so-called Democrats or so-called liberals who are disenchanted Obama supporters, disenchanted Hillary supporters, disenchanted Democrats. And I got to tell you, you're kind of being childish. That's my take on it. You're being a bit immature. People say to me, well, oh, we can't trust Hillary Clinton. And it's the same thing I've said before about Republicans, the same thing I've said before about Barack Obama, the same thing I said before about any elected official. Why would you trust any of them? The issue is not trust. The issue is you elected a person to do a job, and you have to make clear what your priorities are, what your agenda is. You have to make sure that they understand what they're there to do and what's most important to the people that they represent. It has nothing to do with how can we trust them? Can we trust them to be far enough left? And this is another thing. So, you want degrees. There's this sort of litmus test, and it's come out now. And what really frustrates me is that this sort of frustration on the left about the candidates in the Democratic Party seems to have come from the right. It's like I'm wondering how many of these people are actually liberals or actually progressives, because this is the type of stuff that Republicans were doing to themselves 8 years ago, 10 years ago. And now suddenly it's happening on the left. Well, they aren't far enough left. They aren't screaming loud enough. Well, listen, okay, you're being childish, because you can't expect Barack Obama to do everything. You can't expect him to accomplish everything. On one hand, he's got half the country saying he's a dictator, he's breaking the law, and on the other half, you got people saying, why doesn't he just do it on his own? Come on, use your brain, think logically. I mean, how is this guy supposed to maintain a coalition? This is what I'm talking about in terms of, in the past couple of weeks, I've been talking about why voting, why vote, and how to actually make a difference. And the problem is that we see so many people who are so-called disenchanted voters, and you're looking at, first of all, when you start talking about Hillary Clinton and whether or not she should be president, and you're talking about the money in politics, and you're talking about the Democratic Party being, or Hillary Clinton being in bed with Wall Street, you are already about 12 years too late, okay? This is a done deal. So, it's the same thing I said before about Ralph Nader. You turn up once every 4 years and want to talk a bunch of crap about people, criticize what people are doing and how they act and how they go about what they're doing. But who else is doing it? Elizabeth Warren is not running. Okay? You wanna make change, then this is the way to do it. Stop talking about this election. Stop talking about 2016. Get in line, get a Democrat elected, and put together a plan. Find somebody who's willing to work till 2025, so that by 2025 we have a completely different electoral landscape, a completely different campaign finance, campaign funding scheme, and then we can actually have a different outcome. But right now you want to sabotage the status quo, and at the cost of what? This is the same thing that the Republicans are doing to themselves in the past, and same thing with Iran. We just want to go in and tear it all down. Well, this is what I said about unintended consequences. Listen, you don't. It's like you're pulling a string that's going to unravel an entire sweater. Okay, you don't understand what's going to happen. I mean, I'm not a Hillary fan supporter. I just recognize the logic and the necessity and the nature of politics and what happens, electoral politics, and the nature of legislation and governance. So Hillary is going to be the primary candidate. I hope there is a good primary. I hope other people with good things to say compete against her in the Democratic primary. I hope Elizabeth Warren changes her mind and decides to run. But despite all that, Hillary is going to have $1 billion, and she is going to be probably most likely 95% chance going to be the Democratic nominee. And if everything goes right and everything goes in Democrats' favor, everything goes in liberals' favor, and everything goes in progressives' favor, she will be the next president of the United States. So her campaign has leased office space in Brooklyn, so this thing seems to be happening. Of course, she's making more press appearances, so it looks like that this is going to be happening despite the fact that there is no announcement. One of the reasons for not having an announcement is that you can coordinate, you can gather as much money as you can and get money for PACs and things like that without being a quote-unquote candidate. And you can get around a lot of legal issues in terms of fundraising and getting funding for these organizations. Now, some people are complaining. Another complaint is, the dynasty aspect and billion-dollar politics, which I just mentioned. She is probably going to have $1 billion, and she is another Clinton. But listen, don't hate the player, hate the game. This is the game, okay? You want to blame a football player for throwing the football or running the football. You want to blame basketball player for dribbling or shooting a basket. Don't blame Hillary Clinton, someone who's been in politics for decades now, for being in politics and for having connections and for knowing where the money is. Let's get real here. This is one of the things that makes her a good candidate and one of the things that makes her a likely winner of the presidential election. And this whole idea of dynasties, term limits, needing new leaders, fresh blood, this is all just a fallacy, okay? This is just really a bunch of nonsense because, you know, you don't want your heart surgeon to have a term limit. You don't want the fresh blood when you're getting you have a cancer diagnosis, you know? So why do you want it when it comes to people who are running one of the economic powerhouse of the globe? You don't want someone who's green, who doesn't have any experience, you know, doesn't know what they're doing, who isn't smart or capable. Now, you know, so, you know, we can have a relative newcomer in Barack Obama, but there's no reason to say an experienced person is an anathema. That just doesn't make any sense. It's a fantasy. It's a shorthand analysis to say, oh, we should have term limits or we shouldn't have dynasties. It's a way of sort of pacifying yourself and not being engaged in what's going on with your government, okay? So you can say in the short term, oh, he's had 2 terms or she's had 2 terms and they don't need to be in office anymore because term limits. Now, you know, it doesn't make any sense. You know, every elected official has a term limit. It's called an election. That's the term limit. So if you don't like what they're doing, you call their office. You organize your neighbors. You write a letter. And ultimately, you get someone else elected. That's the term limit. So why would you want someone who's, you know, met various leaders around the country, various leaders around the world, who's learned the legislative system, who's learned how to work with other people and learn how to get things done, and then when they just hit their stride, you say, no, that's it, fresh blood? Fresh blood? Why? I mean, think about it logically. What does fresh blood do for you? I mean, it's just nonsense. Fresh blood doesn't do anything for you. Yeah, you get a new perspective. You might get a little more energy, but, you know, what does that do for, like, take your average teenager. You know, they're going to make mistakes. Yeah, they got more energy. Yeah, they got fresher blood, but they also have less experience, less wisdom. So, you know, I just wish people would let go of this sort of fantasy about term limits and about not having politicians in there for a long time. And as I said, by the time you're complaining about candidates for 2016, you are too late, man. The ship has sailed. So let's get on board. If you want to really make changes, like I said before, and like I said previously, you know, let's get some people elected. Let's build a coalition. As Bernie Sanders put it, he said people are getting tired of getting frustrated with the two-party system. And he said, if I was a multi-billionaire, the solution would be easy. I would be able to build an infrastructure in 50 states. Well, that's what it takes to win. That's why we have a two-party system, because they're the ones with the infrastructure. So even independents turn Democrat, independents turn Republican, Republicans turn Democrat, Democrats turn Republican. Why? Because those are the channels to be successfully elected. So if you don't want that to be the case, then you actually have to build an infrastructure. You know, you have to build a highway system. You have to build a power grid. You have to, this doesn't just happen in the presidential election because you're mad or you're frustrated or because, Barack Obama was only 60 degrees progressive when you wanted 180. That's just not how it works. You're already too late to be crying about Hillary Clinton. Start crying about 8 years after Hillary Clinton. Start crying about your city council and your state government. And then when there is a coalition, a power grid, an infrastructure, then you can actually seriously affect change and do something and really put forward an agenda that someone will consider instead of something that people cry about, say, I'm not voting for you. If you're not voting for them, why are they going to listen to you? Okay, if you're not one of their voters, why are they going to listen to you? 50% of the people vote. So, they're going to listen. The Republican lady down in Texas who said that she is against this legislation about women's health, and she said, I'm representing my voters. So that's the way it works, folks. You have to be in the game to win the game, okay? So this crying and criticizing is not the way to go. The way to go is to build infrastructure, build coalitions, build a power structure, build a power grid, and then you can actually do something with it. But until that happens, you're just crying over nothing. You're crying over spilt milk because this election is a done deal. Nothing you can do now, short, as an individual, is going to change what's about to happen. And there's only an act of God that can change it. Something that will catalyze the entire country. And that's why people have conspiracy theories about people starting wars. What do you think Iran is about, okay? So, don't get me angry because, you have Republicans here who are trying to start a war. Why do you think they're trying to start a war? It's so they can take the president, the Oval Office, so that they can, play on that old trope where you turn to Republicans in times of war. And, they think Hillary, she's a woman. The misogyny is already coming out. And this is what really gets me upset, is because I was already looking for, preparing myself for the level of misogyny that was going to come from the Republicans and the right wing. And here I have to, where I'm seeing it the most right now is from the left, the so-called disenchanted people, the so-called ex-Obama supporters. So this is just ridiculous. It's childish. Get over yourselves. Get Hillary elected, or whoever the Democratic nominee is, and it's going to be Hillary. Get her elected, and then move on, and really focus on your issues. Don't, one individual is not the left. One individual is not progressivism. And stop making it that way. Barack Obama is not responsible for righting every wrong. Hillary Clinton is not responsible for righting every wrong. But I'll tell you this, with Hillary Clinton in the White House and Elizabeth Warren in the Senate, we got a hell of a lot better chance than having another Republican as president. So substantial progressive change must exceed one election or one candidate, folks. And keep that in mind. Don't put all your cards or all your eggs in one basket. Don't expect one elected official to accomplish everything. Don't expect any elected official to be worthy of your unquestioning trust. This is something you have to participate in and something you have to work for. And that doesn't mean talking a bunch of crap, criticizing and trying to bring down a Democrat who doesn't meet your litmus test. That means working for your issues and seeking those people who can support your agenda. And those people who are in office or who make it to elected office or who have the ear of the nation like Hillary Clinton, then you work towards making sure she understands the importance of your agenda. That's the way it works. That's how we get things done, and that's how we move forward. All right? So just please get in line. Let's stop this nonsense. Let's not, ask yourself, are you buying into the Republican idea of the way things work, or are you buying into what's going to be the best for the country and best for progressive ideals? Just ask yourself that and realize that this, as I said, is a done deal. This election is over already, okay? So crying about it, criticizing, putting people down, trying to tear down the best version of the left that we have is not productive and not helpful. So that's what I have to say about Hillary Clinton. I'm going to keep talking about her because I just feel the need to push back on some of this. And I think the stakes are too high and too important to not speak up about this. All right, and finally this week I want to talk about something that's sort of been getting a little more attention since January, since the FCC's ruling on net neutrality, which sort of took the lion's share of the media coverage. But another issue that was covered in that ruling and in that event was the issue of municipal broadband. So this is the reason I want to talk a little bit about this is because, for one thing, it has to do with the ability of government to provide services to its citizens. And what is happening is that something like 20 states have laws restricting local municipalities, cities and towns, from providing municipal broadband to to the area residents. So that's one issue, is that, there's laws restricting a city's ability to provide services. The other issue is that it's limiting competition, and I've already talked a little bit about the issue with Comcast and internet service, and how they are failing to upgrade their systems and upgrade their capacity. They're failing to upgrade their footprint and provide coverage to as many people as possible, even though they have a near monopoly. They just are squeezing as much profit out of every sort of gigabyte that comes along, and providing the minimum level of service in order to do that. So the second reason is that it's competition. It's a lack of competition, and the fact that these ISPs have a near monopoly and they're not providing the best possible service. So you probably know that we lag behind, especially in Asian countries and other countries, that in terms of service and service for price. So this legislation, and it's typically Republicans that are supporters of this, and people who try to maintain it, because they don't want any interference from the government in the so-called free market. Well, earlier this year, when the FCC made its net neutrality ruling, it also voted to allow Chattanooga, Tennessee to go around local prohibitions on expanding its municipal network in order to offer the city-backed service to surrounding towns. So one of the restrictions in Tennessee is that you can, for example, Chattanooga can offer service to its citizens, to people who live in Chattanooga, but even if Comcast doesn't want to provide service to the next town over, Chattanooga can't provide them service. So they're just stuck with either only Comcast, no service, and that's it. Even if Chattanooga says, hey, we can easily provide service for them, under the state law in Tennessee, they're not allowed to do it. So the FCC voted to preempt two state laws in Tennessee that restrict the deployment of city-owned broadband networks. Now, telecom companies say it's unfair competition, as I said, but many people are clamoring for change because of the dissatisfaction and with companies like Comcast, who ranks at the top of poor customer service surveys year after year after year. So these guys are not providing good customer service. They're not providing the best service possible, and in fact, they're providing the minimum service possible at an inflated price. So these companies are, as I talked about before, we talked about one of the Tier 1 providers a few weeks ago, and how they actually came out and said these guys are literally trying to maintain traffic congestion. They're doing what they can in order to make sure that services are degraded by failing to make simple fixes to their network. So voters in Boulder and Cherry Hills Village, Yuma, and other Colorado cities have successfully overrode the ban in their state in 2014 election. So Colorado is another state that had a restriction on that. Fortunately, their state laws provide that local municipalities can take a vote and override the restriction. So a lot of these municipalities are doing that, and more are coming up with plans to provide broadband services. Why? Because citizens are complaining. They're saying there's not enough choice, and the service is terrible. Not the technical service, but the customer service is not good enough. And and who wants to work with these companies? At the top of customer dissatisfaction lists every year, and yet customers are forced to give them their money. No one wants to do that. So Erie County, New York, they just released a report that was in support of building a municipal broadband system. So there you go. Tennessee right now is still working on getting their new legislation. Colorado has municipalities that are voting to override their legislation, and in New York they are trying to come up with one county is trying to come up with their own broadband system. To quote FCC Chairman Tom Wheeler, he says, "Some states have designed thickets of red tape designed to limit competition. We are cutting away that red tape consistent with Congress's instructions to encourage the deployment of broadband." So these states are actually, trying to limit the competition because I guess they feel that municipalities have an unfair advantage or it's an unfair competition. But competition's competition, right? So another argument they're making is that, this is a huge infrastructure investment that requires maintenance and, is it within the city's budget? Well, any city that has any sense is going to make sure that their system is profitable and pays for itself, just like Comcast's system or Time Warner's system. This is that's just common sense, right? And of course, now that the epicenter is Tennessee, now that the legislation is changing there and FCC has given their approval of efforts to go around the state legislation, things are a little bit on hold right now, and people are seeing how things shake out. But, of course, the 7 Republican lawmakers led by Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee and Senator Thom Tillis of North Carolina introduced legislation that will prevent the FCC from preempting state laws that restrict construction or operation of broadband networks by municipal entities. So that's H.R. 1106, the States' Rights Municipal Broadband Act of 2015, which is now in committee. So, as I said before, to me this is about service and it's about competition. Also, I just happen to be a believer that especially things like, this is privatization, just like this whole idea of term limits I was just talking about. Privatization is another fallacy, another fantasy. There's a reason why you don't have a private military. There's a reason, why you have to have government involved in certain things. Things that are necessary to the operation of our society, like the flow of information, the flow of goods and services. This is why roads aren't, they've tried to privatize roads, but, it hasn't gotten very far because we don't need roads. Roads are vital. The internet is vital. We don't need the profit motive to be a driver as to what happens to our vital systems. So not only is it a competition issue, not only is it a service issue, but it's an issue of a vital system, a vital aspect of modern society that should not be held hostage to the profit motive of a moralless and a corporation without morals, who has no morals, no moral code, and a corporation who has no mortality. It never dies, never has any reason to worry about death. It just lives on forever. So, we don't have that option as individuals, as people, to wait for 30 years before Comcast sells itself or breaks itself up or decides to make a moral change. We have to live our lives now. And that's one reason to have government in competing with these vital systems. You can have a private system alongside it. That doesn't hurt anything. I also think a power grid. We should have a private power grid. Power is a vital aspect of society. It should not be held hostage to, the profit motive of a corporation. Now, given that most power companies are heavily controlled, but you do understand that people are trying to remove those controls all the time. People are constantly trying to limit the regulation, reduce the regulation, and remove the regulation. So one answer to that is at least allow, if not government control, government competition. There's no reason not to. And before you say that government can't run things properly, that's another myth. Don't believe it. Government can do a lot of things very well, and as I said last week, there's no major industry on earth that exists that has not come to be a major industry without the help of some government. So that's just one issue I just wanted to bring to your attention in case you haven't heard too much about it. Municipal broadband, which is broadband internet service provided by local governments. This is part of what's happening, as well as the whole net neutrality in terms of the FCC reclassification of internet service providers, and part of the legislation in terms of trying to improve the footprint of broadband footprint, internet footprint in the United States, and the quality of internet service in the United States. All right, well, that's it for this week. This is James Andre and TRP News, your weekly news digest, progressive news, and I want to thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you again next week.